What would you do if your child's bright, curious spirit was slowly being crushed by the very place meant to nurture it? In this powerful story, we follow Mia, a dedicated mother who faces an unimaginable situation when her son, Alex, becomes withdrawn and anxious due to harsh treatment at school. As Mia digs deeper, she uncovers disturbing practices that push her to stand up not only for her child, but for every student in the community. How far will she go to protect Alex and bring justice to her school? Will her efforts spark the change needed, or will the system prove too strong to fight? Join us as we explore a journey of courage, resilience, and the fight for a better future. Comment below if you've ever faced a similar challenge, or if you believe every child deserves a safe learning environment. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this one. Now, let's dive into Mia's story. Mia Carter prided herself on being strong. Life had never handed her anything easily, but she fought for what mattered, and what mattered most was her 7-year-old son, Alex. Every day she worked 2 jobs, one at a diner and another cleaning houses, just to make sure Alex had everything he needed. It was glamorous, but Mia was determined that her son would never want for anything, especially not the opportunities she never had. Mia's days started before dawn and stretched late into the evening, but no matter how exhausted she felt, she always made time for Alex. Every night, she'd sit with him to check his homework, pack his lunch for the next day, and kiss him goodnight, with a promise that tomorrow would be even better. Alex, with his bright eyes and endless curiosity, made it all worth it. He was her pride and joy, a light in the often gray world Mia had come to know. Alex's boundless energy and his insatiable curiosity about the world were what kept her going. He loved school, at least he used to. Alex used to run through the door at the end of each day, bursting with stories about what he learned, the friends he made, and the new things he discovered. He was especially passionate about science, always eager to share the latest experiment they had done in class, or the new facts he had memorized about space. But lately, something had changed, and Mia couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of her stomach. It had started subtly. Alex came home quieter, less talkative. Instead of excitedly telling her about his day, he'd shrug and mumble, "It was fine," when she asked him how school went. He stopped asking questions about the world and started spending more time in his room. Mia thought it might just be a phase, kids had those, right? But after 2 weeks, she couldn't ignore it anymore. One night, as she was tucking Alex into bed, she noticed that his usual spark wasn't there. His eyes, usually so bright with curiosity and joy, seemed dim, clouded over with something she couldn't place. "Baby," Mia asked softly, brushing a curl of his hair away from his forehead. "What's going on at school? You've been so quiet lately." Alex shrugged again, pulling the covers up to his chin. "Nothing. I'm just tired," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Mia frowned. "Tired? You don't seem like yourself, honey. Did something happen? Did someone say something to you?" Alex hesitated, his small hands twisting the blanket nervously. He glanced up at her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't like school anymore," he finally admitted, his voice trembling. Mia's heart sank. She sat down on the edge of his bed, her fingers gently stroking his hair. "What do you mean you don't like school? You used to love it. Is something going on? Is it the other kids? The work?" Alex shook his head quickly, but didn't say anything more. "Then what is it, baby? You can tell me. I just want to help." For a long moment, Alex was silent, biting his lower lip the way he always did when he was nervous. Then he whispered the words that would haunt Mia for the rest of the night. "It's Mrs. Andrews? She's Shazmeen?" Mia's brow furrowed. Mrs. Andrews was Alex's second-grade teacher, a woman in her mid-50s with a stern face and a no-nonsense attitude. She had a reputation for being strict, but Mia hadn't heard anything beyond that. What could Mrs. Andrews have done to make Alex feel this way? "What do you mean, she's mean?" Mia asked gently. "What does she do?" But Alex clammed up again, shaking his head and pulling the blanket tighter around himself. "I don't want to talk about it," he whispered. Mia's heart ached for her son. She hated seeing him like this, so small and vulnerable. Alex had always been a happy, energetic child. Now he seemed like a shadow of himself, withdrawn and afraid. "Okay, sweetheart," Mia said softly, leaning down to kiss his forehead. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. But if something's going on, I need to know. Okay, I want to help." Alex nodded, but Mia could tell he was still holding something back. She stayed with him until he drifted off to sleep, her mind racing with questions. What was Mrs. Andrews doing that made her son feel like this? Was it really just that she was strict, or was there something more? That night, Mia lay awake in bed, replaying Alex's words over and over in her mind. She tried to think back to any signs she might have missed, any clues that would explain why her once joyful little boy had become so withdrawn. But nothing made sense. In the days that followed, things only got worse. Alex's behavior at home deteriorated further. He stopped playing outside with his friends, something he used to love. He barely touched the meals Mia packed for him, and when he came home from school, he went straight to his room without a word. Mia's attempts to get him to open up were met with silence or short, mumbled responses. Then one day, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. When she opened Alex's backpack to check for any notes from school, she found a crumpled-up worksheet inside, with red marks scrawled all over it. At the top, in bold letters, Mrs. Andrews had written, "See me." Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the paper. The worksheet wasn't that bad, yes. There were a few mistakes, but nothing that should have warranted such harsh criticism. It seemed excessive, cruel even, to mark up a 7-year-old's work like that. She couldn't take it anymore. Something was wrong, and she needed to find out what it was. The next day, Mia decided to take matters into her own hands. She took the morning off from work and called the school, asking to meet with Mrs. Andrews. She wasn't sure what she expected to find, but she knew she couldn't sit back and do nothing while her son suffered. As she drove to the school, Mia's mind raced with possibilities. Was Mrs. Andrews singling Alex out? Was she treating him differently from the other kids, or was it something else entirely? When Mia arrived at the school, she was led to Mrs. Andrews' classroom by a young office assistant. The classroom was empty, the students out at recess, and Mrs. Andrews sat at her desk reviewing papers. She didn't look up when Mia entered the room. "Mrs. Carter, Mrs. Andrews said without any warmth, her eyes still on the papers in front of her. "I understand you wanted to meet." Mia took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Yes, I did. It's about Alex." Finally, Mrs. Andrews looked up, her expression neutral but distant. "What about him?" Mia hesitated, unsure of how to start. "He's been coming home very upset lately. He says he doesn't like school anymore. And he mentioned that, well, that you've been treating him differently." Mrs. Andrews' eyes narrowed slightly. "Differently? I treat all my students the same, Mrs. Carter. If Alex is upset, it's likely because he's not following directions in class. I've had to discipline him more than once." Mia frowned. "Discipline? What do you mean?" "He talks out of turn, doesn't complete his assignments, and distracts the other students," Mrs. Andrews said matter-of-factly. "I've had to implement consequences to help him understand that there are rules in the classroom." Mia's heart pounded in her chest. "What kind of consequences?" Mrs. Andrews folded her hands on her desk. "Timeouts, sitting away from the other students, missing recess. Standard disciplinary measures, Mrs. Carter. If your son doesn't want to follow the rules, there are consequences." Mia clenched her fists, her anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "But he's 7, she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "Has a good kid. Has just struggling a bit." Mrs. Andrews shrugged. "Perhaps he's struggling because he's not used to structure. Discipline is necessary, Mrs. Carter. Children need boundaries." Mia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Her son wasn't some troublemaker who needed to be punished. He was just a little boy who needed support, not harsh treatment. But it was clear that Mrs. Andrews didn't see it that way. As Mia left the classroom, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger, confusion, fear. Something still didn't sit right with her. She had a sinking feeling that Mrs. Andrews' idea of discipline was far harsher than she was letting on. Mia drove home in silence, her heart heavy. She didn't know what to do next, but one thing was clear: she needed to protect her son. And she wasn't going to stop until she figured out exactly what was going on in that classroom. Mia couldn't stop thinking about that meeting with Mrs. Andrews. There was something about the teacher's cold, detached tone that lingered in her mind, making her stomach churn with anxiety. Sure, she understood the need for discipline. Every child needed boundaries. But what Mrs. Andrews described didn't sound like discipline. It sounded like punishment. And Alex wasn't the type of kid who needed to be punished like that. He was just 7 years old, curious, and yes, sometimes a little chatty. But was that really worth taking away his love for school? Mia wasn't sure what to do next. She thought about taking her concerns to the school principal, but a part of her was hesitant. What if it was just a misunderstanding? What if Mrs. Andrews really did think she was helping Alex still? Every time she looked at her son, so quiet and withdrawn, that nagging feeling in her gut grew stronger. Something wasn't right. The days dragged on, and Alex only seemed to get worse. He no longer laughed when Mia made silly faces at him or asked to help her cook dinner, something he used to love. He barely played with his toys, opting instead to stay in his room, staring blankly at his books or the wall. Mia tried everything to get him to open up. She took him for ice cream, made his favorite meals, and even planned a special weekend trip to the zoo. But nothing worked. Alex remained distant, his once bright eyes dull and empty. One evening, after another uneaten dinner, Mia sat down beside him on the couch. "Alex, sweetie," she said softly, "I'm really worried about you." Alex glanced at her but quickly looked away, his small fingers twisting the edge of the couch cushion. "Is it still about Mrs. Andrews?" Mia asked, trying to keep her voice calm, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "Is she being mean to you again?" For a moment, Alex didn't respond. Then, in the smallest voice Mia had ever heard from him, he whispered, "I don't want to go to school anymore." Mia's throat tightened. She reached for his hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Why not? You used to love school." "I'm always in trouble," Alex said, his voice trembling. "I don't even know why sometimes. Mrs. Andrews makes me sit by myself, and the other kids, they laugh at me." Mia felt like the wind had been knocked out of her. Her sweet, joyful son was being isolated, and no one had told her why hadn't Mrs. Andrews mentioned any of this in their meeting. "Sweetie, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" Mia asked, her voice thick with emotion. Alex shrugged, looking down at his lap. "I thought I was just being bad." Mia's heart broke at those words. Alex wasn't a bad kid, he was just a child, one who needed guidance, not isolation. The anger that had been simmering inside her began to boil over. She had been too passive, too willing to accept Mrs. Andrews' vague explanations. But not anymore. She couldn't sit back while her son was being mistreated. Mia knew what she had to do. If no one would give her straight answers, she was going to find them herself. The next day, without telling Alex, she took the morning off from work and decided to visit the school unannounced. Her stomach churned with nerves as she parked the car and walked toward the school. What if she was overreacting? What if this was all just a misunderstanding? But as she thought about Alex's sad eyes and how withdrawn he had become, her resolve hardened. Something was wrong, and she needed to see it for herself. The school hallways were eerily quiet as Mia walked through them, heading toward Alex's classroom. She had timed her visit during the lunch hour, hoping to catch a glimpse of what was really going on when Mrs. Andrews wasn't expecting her. As she approached the cafeteria, the usual noise of kids laughing and talking filled the air. Mia hesitated for a moment outside the door, her heart pounding. She didn't know what she was about to find, but she had to know. Taking a deep breath, Mia pushed open the cafeteria doors. At first, it looked like a typical lunchroom scene: children sitting at long tables, laughing, trading snacks, and talking animatedly. But as Mia's eyes scanned the room, she didn't see Alex. Her pulse quickened. Where was he? And then, in the far corner of the cafeteria, she saw him. Alex was sitting alone, completely separated from the other children. But it wasn't just that he was alone, he was surrounded by a makeshift cardboard cubicle, as if he were being quarantined from the rest of the world. On the table in front of him sat a large plastic cup with the word detention scrawled across it in bold red letters. Mia froze, her blood turning to ice. Her 7-year-old son was being publicly humiliated in front of all his peers. He sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at his untouched food, while the other kids whispered and pointed at him from a distance. Rage bubbled up inside Mia, so intense she could barely breathe. How could anyone, let alone a teacher, think this was okay? How could they treat a child like this? She didn't even realize she was moving until she was halfway across the cafeteria. Her eyes locked on Alex. He looked up when he heard her approaching, his eyes wide with shock and worse shame. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I'm sorry?" Mia's heart shattered at the sight of him. So small, so broken. She dropped to her knees in front of him, her hands shaking as she gently cupped his face. "Baby, no," Mia said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't do anything wrong? This isn't right." Before Alex could respond, a cold voice cut through the air. "Mrs. Carter." Mia turned to see Mrs. Andrews standing nearby, her arms crossed, a disapproving look on her face. "What are you doing here, Mrs.?" Andrews asked, her tone clipped. Mia stood slowly, her hands still shaking with anger. "What am I doing here? What is this? Why is my son sitting in this box, like he's some kind of outcast?" "Mrs. Andrews raised an eyebrow. "Alex has been disruptive in class. This is a disciplinary measure. It's meant to help him reflect on his behavior." "Reflect on his behavior," Mia repeated, her voice rising with each word. "Has 7 years old, you're publicly humiliating him in front of his classmates. How do you think that's going to help him?" Mrs. Andrews' face remained impassive. "It's a method that has been used successfully with other students, Mrs. Carter. Children need to understand that there are consequences to their actions." "Consequences," Mia spat, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "You think this is about consequences? You're breaking my son's spirit." By now, several of the other staff members had noticed the commotion. The cafeteria had gone eerily quiet, all eyes on Mia and Mrs. Andrews. Mia didn't care who was watching, she wasn't going to let this go. "Mrs. Andrews," Mia said, her voice trembling with barely restrained fury, "if you think this kind of treatment is acceptable, you shouldn't be teaching." Mrs. Andrews' lips pressed into a thin line. "Mrs. Carter, I think you need to calm down. We can discuss this privately." But Mia was done being calm. She had tried being polite, tried trusting that the school would take care of her son. But now, seeing Alex sitting in that makeshift prison, the fire inside her blazed hotter than ever. "No," Mia said firmly. "We're not discussing anything privately. This needs to be addressed right now in front of everyone. You are humiliating my son, and I'm not going to let this continue." Mrs. Andrews opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, Mia reached for the cardboard walls surrounding Alex. With a swift motion, she ripped them down, tossing the pieces aside. The loud crash as they hit the cafeteria floor echoed through the now silent room. Mia knelt in front of Alex again, gently wiping away the tears that had begun to fall down his cheeks. "Come on, baby," she whispered. "We're leaving." She stood, taking Alex's hand in hers, but before she could walk away, Mrs. Andrews stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Carter, you cannot just—" "Watch me," Mia snapped, her voice low and dangerous. Without another word, Mia led Alex out of the cafeteria, her heart pounding with rage and determination. She didn't know what her next move would be, but one thing was certain, this fight was far from over. Mia drove home in silence, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Alex sat beside her, quiet as ever, his small body hunched over in the seat as if he wanted to disappear. She glanced over at him, her heart breaking all over again at the sight of his tear-streaked face. He hadn't spoken since they left the school, and Mia didn't press him. She needed to focus on her next move, but the fury swirling inside her made it hard to think clearly. When they arrived home, Mia turned off the engine and took a deep breath before turning to Alex. "Baby," she said softly, "I know today was really hard, but I need you to understand something. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? None of this is your fault." Alex nodded slightly, but the sadness in his eyes remained. He looked so small and defeated, and it tore Mia apart to see him this way. She had always promised herself that she'd protect him from anything that could hurt him. Yet, here he was, hurting in a way she had never anticipated. "You're a good kid, Alex," Mia continued, reaching over to gently touch his arm. "Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not. We're going to fix this, okay?" Alex didn't answer, but he leaned into her touch, and Mia knew that for now, that was enough. That night, after Alex had gone to bed, Mia sat down at the kitchen table with her phone. Her mind was racing. There was no way she could let this go, not after what she had seen. But she couldn't fight this battle alone, she needed help. She had a feeling Alex wasn't the only child being treated this way. If Mrs. Andrews was using this method of punishment on Alex, who else had she done it to? Mia scrolled through her contacts, thinking of the other parents she had met at school events and birthday parties. She started making calls, hesitating at first, but as she heard story after story, her anger reignited. The first call was to Carla, a mother of one of Alex's classmates. Carla sounded surprised when Mia explained what had happened to Alex, but then she hesitated. "I don't want to get involved in any trouble, Mia," Carla said, her voice wavering. "But my son mentioned something like that a few weeks ago," he said. Mrs. Andrews made another boy sit by himself for talking too much in class. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but now—" Mia could hear the discomfort in Carla's voice, but she could also hear the doubt creeping in. "I'm sorry about Alex," Carla added, her voice softening. "I'll keep an eye on things, but I don't want to stir anything up. You know how it is." Mia sighed as she ended the call. She knew Carla's hesitation was rooted in fear of causing a scene, fear of rocking the boat, but it frustrated her all the same. How could they stay silent when their children were being mistreated? Undeterred, Mia continued making calls, reaching out to anyone she thought might be able to shed light on what was happening in Mrs. Andrews' classroom. A few parents admitted to having concerns, but like Carla, they were reluctant to get involved. Others hadn't noticed anything unusual. But then she called Jenna, a mother of a boy named Ethan, who was in the same grade as Alex. "Mia," Jenna said, her voice thick with frustration, "I've been dealing with this for months. Ethan has come home crying more than once because of Mrs. Andrews. She's always putting him in timeout or calling him out in front of the class. It's humiliating for him, and it's been affecting his self-esteem." Mia's pulse quickened. Has Ethan ever mentioned being isolated, like with a cubicle or a detention cup? Jenna hesitated, and Mia could almost hear the wheels turning in her mind. "You know, he has mentioned something like that. I didn't think it was a big deal at first, but now that you bring it up—" "Yeah, Mrs. Andrews made him sit alone once and put up these dividers around him. He said it made him feel like he was in jail." Mia's heart sank. It was worse than she thought. "Jenna, we have to do something about this. Our kids shouldn't be treated like this. It's not discipline, it's cruelty." Jenna agreed, and as the conversation continued, Mia felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone. There were other parents who had seen the same thing happening to their children, and together they could push for change. By the end of the week, Mia had connected with half a dozen other parents whose children had experienced similar treatment from Mrs. Andrews. Some had noticed their kids becoming withdrawn or anxious. Others had witnessed the public humiliation in action during school events or heard about it from their children. With each story she heard, Mia's resolve hardened. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. And if Mrs. Andrews had been getting away with it for this long, then it was likely the school administration had either turned a blind eye or actively ignored it. Mia and the other parents decided to meet one evening at Jenna's house to discuss their next steps. As Mia entered the living room, she saw the familiar faces of the parents she had spoken to over the past few days. The air was thick with tension and uncertainty, but also a shared determination. "Thank you all for coming," Mia began, standing at the front of the room. "I know this isn't easy to talk about, but it's clear that something has to change. We can't keep letting this happen to our kids." Jenna nodded in agreement. "I've already seen the damage it's done to Ethan. He used to love school, but now he hates it. I can't believe we've let this go on for so long." Another parent, Mr. Johnson, a tall, soft-spoken man with a son named Marcus, chimed in. I've tried talking to the principal before about some of Mrs. Andrews' methods, but I was brushed off. They said she's one of the best teachers they have, and that Marcus just needs more structure. But I don't think it's about structure. It's about control. The group nodded in agreement, and as the meeting went on, it became clear that they needed to escalate the issue. Complaining to the principal hadn't worked for any of them, so they needed to take their concerns to the next level. We need to go to the school board, Mia said firmly. This isn't just about Mrs. Andrews. It's about the entire system allowing this to happen. If we don't hold them accountable, who will? The parents agreed, and they made a plan to gather all the necessary documentation, emails, notes from meetings, any evidence they could find to back up their claims. They decided to submit a formal complaint to the school board, demanding an investigation into Mrs. Andrews and the school's disciplinary practices. The days leading up to the school board meeting were tense. Mia and the other parents worked tirelessly, compiling their stories and gathering support from others in the community. Word spread quickly, and soon more parents were coming forward with their own experiences, some related to Mrs. Andrews, others about similar issues in different classrooms. As the group prepared for the meeting, Mia felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. This was the moment they had been working toward, but she knew it wouldn't be easy. The school board had a reputation for being slow to act, and she worried they would downplay the issue, just as the principal had. When the night of the meeting arrived, Mia and the coalition of parents filed into the crowded school board auditorium. Mia clutched a folder of documents tightly in her hands, her heart racing. She glanced around the room, seeing the faces of parents she had spoken to, parents who were counting on her to speak for their children. As the meeting began, the usual formalities were addressed: the budget, upcoming events, new hires. But when the time came for public comments, Mia stood, her legs trembling beneath her as she approached the microphone. "Good evening," Mia began, her voice steady but her heart pounding. "My name is Mia Carter, and I am here to talk about something deeply concerning happening in our school." She took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces of the school board members, most of whom looked mildly curious but uninterested. But as she began to recount what had happened to Alex, the isolation, the public humiliation, the way he had been made to feel like he didn't belong, she saw their expressions shift. Some of them leaned forward, frowning in concern. Mia didn't hold back. She told them about the other parents, the stories of children who had come home crying, who had lost their love for school because of the harsh, punitive measures Mrs. Andrews had used. She spoke of the emotional toll it had taken on Alex, how he had gone from being an energetic, happy child to one who barely smiled anymore. "We entrust our children to this school," Mia said, her voice rising with emotion. "We trust that the teachers here will nurture them, guide them, and help them grow. But what's happening in Mrs. Andrews' classroom is not nurturing. It's harmful. It's damaging our children's confidence, their spirit, and their love of learning. And it has to stop." By the time Mia finished, the room was silent. The weight of her words hung in the air. She glanced back at the parents sitting behind her, who nodded in support, their eyes filled with the same determination she felt. For a moment, the school board members exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond. But then, one of them, a woman named Mrs. Hill, cleared her throat. "Mrs. Carter," she said, her tone measured but sympathetic, "we take these allegations very seriously. We will conduct a full investigation into Mrs. Andrews' conduct and the disciplinary practices at the school." Mia felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. In the weeks that followed, the school board launched a formal investigation into Mrs. Andrews. Mia and the other parents were interviewed, and more families came forward with their own experiences. The media caught wind of the story, and soon local news outlets were reporting on the controversy. Mia found herself in the spotlight, speaking not just for Alex, but for all the children who had been affected. It was exhausting, emotionally draining work, but Mia knew she couldn't stop now. She had to keep pushing. This wasn't just about getting justice for Alexit was about changing the system that had allowed this to happen in the first place. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that Mrs. Andrews had a history of using harsh disciplinary tactics. Some teachers had raised concerns before, but nothing had been done. The more the school board uncovered, the more Mia realized that this wasn't just about one bad teacher. It was about a culture of punishment that had been allowed to fester for far too long. Mia sat at the kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet space around her. It had been 3 weeks since she had stood before the school board, laying bare the reality of what had been happening to Alex and so many other children in Mrs. Andrews' classroom. Since then, the investigation had been progressing, but it felt painfully slow. With every day that passed, Mia's frustration grew. How long would they allow this to continue? How much more damage would be done to children like Alex before they took real action? Her phone buzzed on the table, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Jenna. Meeting set with Principal Blake tomorrow at 9 a.m. Mem, you ready? Mia's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The principal had finally agreed to meet with the group of concerned parents, likely because of the growing pressure from the school board investigation. She had no illusions about how difficult the meeting would be. Principal Blake had a reputation for being tough and notoriously defensive of his staff, but Mia was ready. She had to be. She quickly texted back, "More than ready. Let's do this." The next morning, Mia, Jenna, Mr. Johnson, and 2 other parents gathered in the small office just outside Principal Blake's door. The tension in the room was palpable, each parent wearing a look of determination and quiet resolve. Mia could see the nervous energy in their faces, but she also knew that each one of them shared her commitment to seeing this through. The door to Principal Blake's office opened, and his assistant gestured for them to enter. Mia led the way, her heart pounding in her chest, but she walked with purpose. She wouldn't let herself show any fear. Principal Blake was seated behind his desk, his expression unreadable as he stood to greet them. He was a tall, imposing man in his late 50s, his graying hair neatly combed back. He extended his hand to Mia first, though his handshake felt more like a formality than a genuine gesture. "Mrs. Carter," he said in a clipped tone, "thank you for coming. Please, everyone, have a seat." Mia exchanged a glance with Jenna before they all sat down. The room felt small and stifling, the weight of the meeting pressing down on them. Principal Blake settled into his chair, folding his hands on the desk in front of him. "I understand you all have concerns about Mrs. Andrews and the disciplinary methods she has been using in her classroom." Mia didn't miss the way he said concerns with a hint of condescension. Her jaw tightened, but she forced herself to stay calm. "That's right," Mia said, her voice steady. "We've spoken to the school board, and as you know, there's an ongoing investigation into Mrs. Andrews' conduct. But we wanted to meet with you directly because our children are still being affected. Alex, Ethan, Marcus there, all still traumatized by what they've experienced in her classroom." Principal Blake nodded slowly, but there was no trace of empathy in his eyes. "I understand your frustration, Mrs. Carter. However, I want to assure you that Mrs. Andrews is one of our most experienced teachers. She has been with this school for over 20 years, and her methods, while perhaps unconventional, have always been effective in maintaining discipline in her classroom." Mia's fists clenched under the table. "Effective," she repeated, her voice rising. "Do you call isolating children and humiliating them in front of their peers effective? Because my son doesn't. He's terrified of going to school now. He doesn't even want to get out of bed in the morning?" Jenna leaned forward, her voice shaking with emotion. "My son Ethan hasn't been the same either. He used to love learning, but now he feels like a failure. All because of the way Mrs. Andrews treated him." Principal Blake's expression hardened. "Discipline is a necessary part of education. Children need to learn boundaries and consequences for their actions. If Mrs. Andrews had to take extra steps to maintain order in her classroom, it was likely because your children were being disruptive." Mia felt a surge of anger rise in her chest. "They're 7 years old," she snapped. "Children are going to talk in class, ask questions, get excited. That's part of learning. But instead of nurturing that, Mrs. Andrews crushed their spirits. And you're telling me that's justified?" Principal Blake's face remained impassive. Mrs. Carter, I understand that you're upset, but the methods Mrs. Andrews used are standard practices for classroom management. She has always acted in the best interest of her students. Mia could hardly believe what she was hearing. How could he be so blind, so unwilling to see the damage that had been done? Her voice shook with fury as she spoke. Standard practices? No, Mr. Blake. Publicly shaming a child, isolating them from their peers, those are not standard practices. They're abusive. Mr. Johnson, who had been quiet until now, finally spoke, his voice low but firm. We're not here to ask for explanations, Principal Blake. We're here to demand that something be done. Mrs. Andrews cannot continue to treat our children this way. If the school doesn't take action, well, take it to the next level. Principal Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. Are you threatening legal action, Mr. Johnson? Mia interjected before Mr. Johnson could answer. We're not making threats. We're simply telling you that we won't stand by while our children are mistreated. If the school doesn't address this, well, find other ways to make sure it's addressed. The room fell into a tense silence. Mia could see the flash of frustration in Principal Blake's eyes, but she wasn't backing down. None of them were. Finally, Principal Blake sighed and leaned back in his chair. The school board is conducting their investigation, and we will, of course, abide by their findings. In the meantime, I will ensure that Mrs. Andrews' disciplinary methods are reviewed, and I will be monitoring the situation closely. It wasn't enough. Mia knew it. The other parents knew it. But it was something. Thank you, Mr. Blake, Mia said, her voice firm but restrained. We'll be holding you to that. After the meeting, the parents gathered in the parking lot, a mixture of frustration and determination simmering between them. That was a waste of time, Jenna muttered, crossing her arms. He's just going to brush this off like he always does. Mia shook her head. Not this time.
We're not letting him.
We're going to keep pushing until they can't ignore us anymore. Jenna raised an eyebrow. How they're already dragging their feet with the investigation. What else can we do? Mia's mind raced. She knew Principal Blake wasn't going to take action unless they forced his hand. They needed more pressure, something that would make the school board and the principal realize that this issue was going away. And then it hit her. We go public, Mia said, her voice steady with resolve. Jenna frowned. What do you mean? We take this to the media, Mia explained. We tell our stories. We show the community what's really happening in that classroom. Once the media gets involved, the school won't be able to sweep this under the rug. The other parents looked at each other, some hesitant, but Mia saw the spark of agreement in their eyes. They won't be able to ignore us anymore, Mr. Johnson said, nodding. It's worth a shot. Over the next week, Mia worked tirelessly to get the word out. She contacted local news stations, explained the situation, and sent them copies of the documentation the group had gathered. She reached out to community leaders, asking for their support. Soon, the media picked up the story, and word began to spread. Mia, Jenna, and the other parents organized a protest in front of the school. They printed flyers, created posters, and called every parent they knew, urging them to join the cause. The night before the protest, Mia sat at her kitchen table, her nerves on edge. But she knew this was the right thing to do. She wasn't just fighting for Alex anymore. She was fighting for all the kids who had been mistreated. The next morning, as Mia approached the school, she felt a surge of pride and relief. A crowd had already gathered, parents and children holding signs that read, "Education, not humiliation," and "Stop the shame, start teaching." Mia walked to the front of the crowd, her heart pounding in her chest as she stood behind the makeshift podium. She took a deep breath, looking out at the faces of parents, students, and community members who had come to stand with her. Thank you all for being here, Mia began, her voice strong and steady despite the nerves. We're here today because our children deserve better. They deserve to be treated with respect, with dignity, and with kindness. But right now, that's not happening in our school. The crowd murmured in agreement, their signs held high in the air. For too long, teachers like Mrs. Andrews have been allowed to humiliate and isolate our children in the name of discipline, Mia continued, her voice rising with emotion. But this isn't discipline. It's cruelty, and we're not going to stand for it anymore." As Mia spoke, she noticed a news van pulling up at the edge of the crowd. A reporter and a cameraman stepped out, quickly setting up their equipment. Mia's heart raced, but she kept going. "We're calling on the school board to take immediate action," Mia said, her voice firm. "We want an end to these harmful disciplinary practices, and we want Mrs. Andrews to be held accountable for the damage she has done. Our children deserve better, and we won't stop until they get it." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices rising in unity. The media attention worked. Within hours of the protest, news outlets across the city were reporting on the story. Parents were interviewed, sharing their experiences, and the pressure on the school administration intensified. The school board released a statement later that day, acknowledging the protest and promising to review the situation thoroughly. But Mia wasn't satisfied with vague promises. She knew this was only the beginning. As the days passed, more parents came forward with their stories, and the school board's investigation accelerated. The pressure from the media and the community was too much to ignore, and finally, Principal Blake was forced to act. Mia sat at her kitchen table again, this time with a growing sense of hope. The protest had been a success beyond anything she'd imagined. The crowd, the media coverage, and the community support were all signs that people were finally paying attention. The school board couldn't ignore them any longer. And more than anything, Mia felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not just for herself, but for all the parents who had stood up for their children, refusing to accept the mistreatment any longer. But now the waiting was the hardest part. The school board had promised to speed up the investigation, and the pressure from the media ensured that they wouldn't be able to drag their feet like they had before. Still, Mia found herself constantly checking her phone, waiting for updates, wondering when the final decision would come down. Her phone buzzed, and her heart leaped as she saw a text from Jenna meeting with the board tomorrow at 2 p.m. "Ma'am, they've reached a decision." Mia's pulse quickened. This was it, the moment they'd been waiting for. She quickly texted back, "I'll be there. We're almost there." The following day, Mia found herself walking into the school board building, her hands shaking with nervous energy. Jenna, Mr. Johnson, and the rest of the group were there, and the air was thick with anticipation. None of them knew exactly what the school board's decision would be, but they were united in their resolve to see justice done. The boardroom was large and formal, with a long table in the center. The members of the school board sat on one side, their faces serious, while Mia and the other parents sat opposite them, waiting for the meeting to begin. Mrs. Hill, the board member who had shown the most sympathy during the earlier meeting, stood and addressed the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you know, we have been conducting a thorough investigation into the disciplinary practices used by Mrs. Andrews, as well as the overall culture of punishment at the school. We understand the concerns you've raised, and we take them very seriously." Mia held her breath as Mrs. Hill continued. "After reviewing the evidence and speaking with both parents and staff, we have come to the conclusion that Mrs. Andrews' methods were not only inappropriate, but harmful to the students in her care. The use of isolation and public shaming as forms of discipline are not in line with the values of our school system, and we deeply regret that this went on for as long as it did." Mia's heart swelled with relief. Finally, someone was acknowledging the damage that had been done. She exchanged a glance with Jenna, who gave her a small, relieved nod. "As of today, Mrs. Hill continued, Mrs. Andrews will be placed on administrative leave while we conduct further reviews of her conduct. We are also implementing immediate changes to the school's disciplinary policies, with an emphasis on restorative justice and positive behavior support. We are committed to ensuring that every child in our schools is treated with dignity and respect." The room was silent for a moment as Mrs. Hill's words sank in. Mia felt a wave of emotion crash over her, relief, joy, and a sense of triumph. They had done it. They had forced the school to listen, to act. Alex and the other children wouldn't have to endure the same humiliation again. After a moment, Mrs. Hill added, "We also want to offer our deepest apologies to the families who have been affected by this. We are committed to making sure that nothing like this happens again." As the meeting concluded, Mia stood, feeling lighter than she had in months. This wasn't just about Alex anymore. It was about changing the system for every child in that school, and they had succeeded. They had forced change where it was needed most. In the weeks that followed, the changes promised by the school board began to take shape. Mrs. Andrews was officially removed from her position, and new teachers were brought in to replace her. The disciplinary policies at the school were overhauled, with a focus on restorative justice methods that encouraged positive behavior rather than punishing children in ways that harmed their emotional well-being. Mia and the other parents were invited to be part of the review process, and their input helped shape the new policies. The school even began hosting community meetings where parents, teachers, and students could openly discuss concerns and work together to create a more supportive environment. Alex, once withdrawn and fearful of school, slowly began to return to his old self. Each day, he seemed a little brighter, a little more like the curious, joyful boy Mia remembered. One afternoon, as Mia picked him up from school, Alex came running toward her with a big smile on his face, his backpack bouncing as he ran. "Mama, guess what? We got to do a science experiment today. It was about making rockets, and it was so fun." Mia's heart swelled with pride. Seeing her son excited about learning again was the greatest reward she could have asked for. "That sounds amazing, baby," Mia said, kneeling down to hug him. "I'm so proud of you." As they walked to the car, hand in hand, Mia felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road to get here had been long and painful, but it had been worth it. They had made a difference not just for Alex, but for all the children at the school. One afternoon, a few weeks after the changes had been implemented, Mia received an unexpected call from the school superintendent's office. They wanted to invite her to speak at a district-wide meeting about the changes that had taken place at Alex's school and how the parents had helped bring about those changes. The superintendent wanted to use Mia's experience as a model for other schools in the district. At first, Mia hesitated. She wasn't used to public speaking, and the thought of standing in front of a room full of educators made her nervous. But then she thought about Alex, about all the children who had suffered in silence because no one had spoken up for them. If she could help bring about more change, if her story could inspire other parents to stand up for their kids, then it was worth it. A week later, Mia stood in front of a large audience at the district meeting, her heart pounding in her chest. She looked out at the sea of face teachers, administrators, and other parents, and took a deep breath. "When I first realized that my son was being mistreated at school," Mia began, "I felt powerless. I didn't know how to fix it. But what I've learned from this experience is that we, as parents, have a voice. And when we use that voice, when we refuse to accept mistreatment, when we demand better for our children, change can happen." As she spoke, Mia felt her confidence grow. She told the story of Alex, of the protest, of the fight to change the school's policies. She spoke about the importance of creating a learning environment where children are supported, not shamed. And as she spoke, she saw nods of agreement, faces softening in understanding. When she finished, the room erupted in applause, and Mia felt a deep sense of pride wash over her. She had taken a stand, not just for Alex, but for every child who deserved better. And now her story was helping to spark change in schools across the district. Later that evening, after putting Alex to bed, Mia sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, Mia felt a sense of calm. It had been a long and difficult journey, but they had come out the other side stronger. Alex was thriving again, the school had changed for the better, and Mia had found a new purpose, advocating for children and helping to create environments where they could succeed. As she sipped her tea, Mia thought about all the other parents who might be going through similar struggles. She thought about the children who were still suffering in silence, who needed someone to fight for them. And she knew that her work wasn't done. Mia pulled out her phone and opened an email from a parent in a neighboring district, asking for advice on how to approach their own school board about similar issues. Mia smiled as she began to type her response, offering support and guidance. The fight for fairness and justice in education wasn't over, but Mia knew now that change was possible. and she wasn't going to stop until every child had the chance to learn in a safe, nurturing environment. In the weeks that followed Mia's speech at the district-wide meeting, change began to ripple beyond Alex's school. Parents from neighboring schools reached out to Mia, eager to learn how they could advocate for their own children. Some had similar stories about harsh disciplinary methods, while others wanted to know how they could work together to create a more inclusive and supportive environment for their kids. Mia found herself busier than ever, attending meetings, speaking at events, and helping other parents draft letters to their school boards. The work was exhausting, but it was also deeply fulfilling. She had gone from being a single mother fighting for her son to becoming a community leader, pushing for change that would benefit all children. But not everyone was happy with the changes taking place. A small but vocal group of parents from Alex's school began to express their dissatisfaction, claiming that the new policies were too lenient and that discipline was being sacrificed in the name of political correctness. They argued that the removal of strict disciplinary measures would lead to chaos in the classrooms, and they wanted things to go back to the way they were. Mia had expected some pushback, but the intensity of it surprised her. The group of dissenting parents organized their own meetings, criticizing the changes and calling for a return to the old ways of maintaining order in the classroom. They argued that the new policies were making teachers' jobs more difficult, and that students were taking advantage of the more lenient system. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Mia scrolled through social media, only to find that the dissenters had begun posting comments about her personally. They accused her of being too soft, of coddling children, and of undermining teachers' authority. Some even suggested that her son, Alex, was part of the problem, and that she was making excuses for his behavior. Mia's hands trembled as she read the comments. She had known there would be resistance, but seeing people attack her, and worse, attack Alex, was like a punch to the gut. Mia couldn't sleep that night. The comments and accusations played on a loop in her mind. What if they were right? What if the changes she had fought so hard for were too lenient? What if teachers really did need those strict disciplinary methods to keep order in the classroom? She tossed and turned, doubt gnawing at her. She had always been so sure that what she was doing was right. But now, faced with this backlash, she began to question herself. The next morning, as she was getting Alex ready for school, Mia noticed that he was unusually quiet. Normally, Alex would be chatting excitedly about his day ahead, but today he seemed distracted. "Are you okay, honey?" Mia asked, crouching down to look him in the eyes. Alex shrugged, not meeting her gaze. "Some kids at school were talking about the new rules. They said their parents don't like them. They said you're the reason the teachers are mad." Mia's heart sank. She had hoped to shield Alex from the worst of the backlash, but it seemed that the negativity had reached him as well. "Alex," Mia said gently, "you know that what we did, what we're still doing's to make things better for you and for every kid, right? It's not about making teachers mad. It's about making sure no one gets treated unfairly again." Alex looked up at her, his brow furrowed. "But what if they're right? What if the new rules are too easy?" Mia's breath caught in her throat. Seeing her son doubt the changes they had worked so hard for was like a knife to the heart. But she couldn't let him see her uncertainty. "I know it's hard, baby," Mia said softly, "but the new rules aren't about being easy or hard. They're about being fair. And sometimes being fair is harder than being strict. But it's the right thing to do." Alex nodded slowly, though Mia could tell he was still processing everything. As she watched him walk out the door to catch the bus, Mia's resolve hardened again. She couldn't let the backlash derail the progress they had made. But she also knew she couldn't fight this battle alone anymore. Mia realized that the division among the parents was growing, and if she didn't find a way to address it, the entire movement could fall apart. She needed to find common ground with the dissenting parents, to show them that the changes weren't about undermining discipline, but about creating a system that worked for everyone. She called Jenna and the other core members of their parent coalition, explaining her concerns. "We need to have a dialogue with the parents who are against the changes," Mia said. "We can't just ignore them. If we don't address their concerns, This whole thing could backfire. Jenna agreed. But how do we get them to listen? They seem pretty set in their ways. We don't argue with them, Mia said, her mind racing with ideas. We invite them to talk. We ask them what they're worried about, and we listen. We find a way to bring them into the conversation instead of shutting them out. Mia and Jenna organized a community dialogue night, inviting parents from both sides of the issue to come together and share their perspectives. They reached out to the dissenting parents, making it clear that the goal of the meeting wasn't to argue, but to listen and find solutions that worked for everyone. When the night of the meeting arrived, Mia was nervous. She didn't know if the dissenting parents would even show up, let alone be open to dialogue. But as she and Jenna set up chairs in the school gymnasium, a small group of parents began to trickle in, some familiar faces, others who had been vocal in their opposition to the changes. Mia took a deep breath, reminding herself that this was the next step in their fight, not against these parents, but with them. As the meeting began, Mia stood up to address the group, her voice calm and measured. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she said, glancing around the room. "We're here because we all want the same thing for our children to succeed in school, to feel safe and supported, and to grow into kind, responsible adults. I know we don't all agree on how to get there, but I think we can find a way to work together." There were a few murmurs from the dissenting parents, but no one interrupted. Mia could sense the tension in the room, but she pressed on. "I want to hear from you," Mia continued. "I want to understand what your concerns are about the new policies, and I want to find a way to address those concerns, because this isn't just about one side winning or losing. It's about what's best for our kids." At first, the dissenting parents were reluctant to speak, but after some coaxing, one of the more outspoken critics, a father named Mr. Langston, finally stood up. "I'll be honest, Mr. Langston said, his arms crossed over his chest. "I don't like these new policies. I think they're too lenient. Kids need discipline, and I don't think these restorative justice methods are tough enough." Several parents nodded in agreement, and Mia felt the familiar tightness in her chest. But instead of pushing back, she listened. "I hear you, Mr. Langston," Mia said, keeping her voice steady. "I understand that discipline is important. No one here is saying that we shouldn't have rules or consequences for breaking those rules. What we're trying to do is make sure that those consequences don't harm a child's confidence or make them feel like they're not good enough. It's about teaching them, not punishing them." Mr. Langston frowned, but he didn't interrupt. "I'm not saying the old system didn't work for some kids," Mia continued, "but for others, like my son Alex, it was damaging. The public shaming, the isolation, it made him feel like he didn't belong. And that's not what school should be about." Another parent, Mrs. Thompson, who had initially supported the old disciplinary methods, spoke up. "But what if the new rules don't work? What if kids take advantage of the leniency?" Mia nodded, acknowledging the concern. "That's a fair question. And I don't think anyone here wants a system where kids don't respect authority or follow the rules. But I believe we can create a balanced system where discipline is fair and consistent, but also compassionate. We're not trying to soften discipline, we're trying to make it more effective for all students." The room fell silent for a moment, the tension slowly easing. Mia could see some of the parents nodding, and she knew they were beginning to understand her perspective. By the end of the night, the mood in the room had shifted. The dissenting parents weren't entirely convinced, but they were willing to continue the conversation. And that was a victory in itself. Over the next few weeks, Mia and the Parent Coalition worked closely with both supporters and dissenters to find common ground. They held more meetings, invited teachers and administrators to join the discussions, and slowly began to build a more unified approach to discipline at the school. The changes weren't immediate, and not everyone was satisfied. But progress was being made. The school implemented a new system where parents and teachers worked together to address behavioral issues in a way that supported students' growth rather than simply punishing them. Alex, now thriving under the new system, came home one day with a smile on his face. "Mama," he said, "we learned about kindness today. Miss Carter said that being kind is the best way to help people do better." Mia smiled, pulling him into a hug. "That's right, baby. And it's true for all of us. As the new school year began, the atmosphere at Alex's school had changed dramatically. There was a different energy in the hallways, a sense of renewal and hope. The overhaul of the disciplinary system had been met with skepticism at first, but as time went on, both teachers and parents began to see the positive effects. The punitive methods of the past were replaced with more compassionate strategies, and the students were thriving. Alex was a shining example of that success. His smile had returned, his love for learning reignited, and the quiet, withdrawn boy Mia had once worried about was now a distant memory. Every morning he bounded out of bed, excited to go to school, eager to see his friends and participate in class. And every evening when Mia asked him how his day was, his answers were long, full of stories about experiments, projects, and new things he had learned. Mia watched with pride as her son bloomed in the environment they had fought so hard to create. One Friday afternoon, as Mia sat waiting for Alex to come home from school, she allowed herself a rare moment of quiet reflection. The past year had been the hardest of her life, filled with emotional highs and devastating lows, but it had also been the most transformative. She had started as a mother fighting for her son, but in the process, she had found her voice and her power. Mia glanced at her kitchen table, now covered with papers, emails from parents across the district, and a folder filled with notes from the school's newly established Parent-Teacher Advisory Board. The board had asked her to serve as a parent liaison, a role designed to bridge the gap between teachers and parents, ensuring that concerns were addressed early and that communication remained open and transparent. It was a far cry from where Mia had been a year ago, unsure of how to approach the problem, feeling isolated and overwhelmed. Now, she was part of a system that valued parents' input, that took children's well-being seriously, and that was committed to fostering a culture of respect and inclusion. She had never expected to be a leader, but the experience had shown her that leadership didn't always look like she thought it would. Sometimes leadership meant simply refusing to stay silent when something was wrong. It meant rallying others around a common cause and fighting for what was right, even when the odds seemed impossible. The sound of the front door opening snapped Mia out of her thoughts. Alex came running in, his backpack swinging wildly as he burst through the door with his usual energy. "Mama, guess what?" he shouted, dropping his bag on the floor. "We had a class meeting today, and we all got to share our ideas about how to make recess more fun. And then we had a kindness circle, where we told each other nice things." Mia smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "That sounds amazing, baby. What did you say in the kindness circle?" Alex beamed. "I told Jessie that she's really good at drawing, and I told Tim that he's always really nice to everyone." "And what did they say about you?" Mia asked, ruffling his hair. Alex grinned. "Jessie said I'm smart, and Tim said I'm a good friend." Mia pulled him into a hug, feeling a surge of emotion. This was the world she had wanted for Alexa Place, where he was valued, where his kindness and intelligence were celebrated, not stifled. A place where he could grow into the person he was meant to be, free from fear and shame. "I'm so proud of you, Alex," Mia whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You're an amazing kid, and I'm so glad you're happy at school again." Alex hugged her tightly. "I love you, Mama." Mia kissed the top of his head. "I love you too, baby. More than anything." A few weeks later, Mia received another call from the school district. The superintendent invited her to speak at a district-wide education conference, where she would share her experience and discuss the changes that had taken place at Alex's school. The goal was to inspire other schools in the district to adopt similar reforms, particularly in how they handled discipline and parent-teacher collaboration. At first, Mia felt the familiar nervousness creep in. Public speaking had never been her strong suit, and the thought of standing in front of so many educators and administrators made her stomach twist in knots. But she knew she couldn't turn down the opportunity. This was her chance to help make an even bigger impact, to show others that change was possible when people stood together and refused to accept the status quo. On the day of the conference, Mia stood backstage, clutching the small note cards she had prepared, her palms sweating. She had practiced her speech over and over, but still, her nerves buzzed with anticipation. But when she stepped out onto the stage and saw the audience rows of teachers, parents, and administrators, something shifted inside her. This wasn't about her. It was about the children, about Alex, and about every child who deserved a fair and supportive education. Taking a deep breath, Mia began her speech. "When I first realized that my son was being mistreated at school," she said, her voice steady, "I felt powerless. I didn't know how to fix it, and I didn't know where to start. But what I learned through this journey is that we, as parents and educators, have the power to create change. It's not easy, and it doesn't happen overnight. But when we stand together, when we speak up for our children and refuse to accept anything less than respect and dignity for them, change becomes inevitable." Mia went on to tell the story of Alex, of the fight to reform the school's disciplinary policies, and of the resistance they had faced along the way. But she also spoke about the power of community, about how parents, teachers, and administrators had come together to create a better environment for the students. "We're all here for the same reason," Mia said, her voice filled with conviction. "We want our children to succeed. We want them to feel safe, to be nurtured, and to have the opportunity to grow into kind, confident people. And we have a responsibility to make sure that happens." As she finished, the room erupted in applause. Mia felt a wave of relief and pride wash over her. She had done it, she had told her story, and she knew that it would resonate with the people in the room. More importantly, she knew that this was just the beginning. The movement for change was growing, and Mia was proud to be part of it. That evening, as Mia sat with Jenna and the other parents from the coalition, they reflected on how far they had come. The battle to change Alex's school had been long and difficult, but the rewards were undeniable. Not only had the school's culture shifted, but other schools in the district were starting to take notice. The changes were spreading, but Mia knew that the fight wasn't over. There would always be challenges, more schools to reach, more children to protect, more parents to empower. The road ahead was long, but it was one she was willing to walk. "We've come so far," Jenna said, raising her glass of iced tea to the group. "But there's still more to do. Here's to the next chapter." Mia smiled, clinking her glass with the others. "To the next chapter," she echoed, "and to making sure every child has a voice." As the months passed, Mia's role in the community continued to grow. She was invited to join several district committees focused on improving school policies, and she began working with local organizations to advocate for children's rights. Through it all, she kept her focus on the children, on Alex, and on the countless other kids who needed someone to stand up for them. Mia also worked closely with teachers, helping to bridge the gap between parents and educators. She knew that real change required collaboration, and she was determined to keep that conversation going. Slowly but surely, schools across the district were adopting restorative justice practices and creating more inclusive environments for their students. One afternoon, as Mia picked up Alex from school, she noticed a mural on the side of the school building. It was a colorful painting of children from different backgrounds holding hands, with the words, "Every Child Matters," written in bold letters above them. Alex tugged at her hand, his eyes shining with excitement. "Mama, we helped paint that," he said, pointing to the mural. "It's to remind everyone that all kids are special and important." Mia felt a lump form in her throat. This was what she had fought for, a world where every child was seen, valued, and respected. "You're right, Alex," Mia said, squeezing his hand. "Every child does matter, and we're going to keep making sure everyone knows that." As they walked toward the car, Mia felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, she felt like they were walking it together. Parents, teachers, and children, all moving forward with the same goal in mind. And that, Mia knew, was the most powerful change of all. Months passed, and the changes Mia had helped to implement at Alex's school continued to take root. The new disciplinary policies, built on empathy and respect, were reshaping how teachers, parents, and students interacted with one another. Conversations between educators and families became more collaborative, focused not just on punishment, but on understanding why children behaved the way they did. and how to guide them toward better decisions without harming their self-esteem. But as Mia knew all too well, meaningful change didn't happen overnight. The road to progress was filled with challenges, and while many embraced the new system, there were still pockets of resistance. Some teachers struggled with the transition from punitive measures to restorative practices, and a few parents continued to voice concerns that the new methods weren't strict enough to maintain order in the classroom. Mia, now more experienced in navigating these conflicts, approached these concerns with patience and understanding. She had become a familiar face at school board meetings and parent-teacher conferences, and her reputation as a leader who listened to both sides earned her respect even from those who didn't always agree with her. One afternoon, Mia received a call from Principal Blake, who had undergone his own transformation since the early days of their conflict. While initially resistant to the changes, he had gradually come to see the benefits of the new system, especially as discipline-related incidents decreased and student engagement improved. "Mia," Principal Blake said as she answered the phone, "I'm hoping you can help us with something." Mia smiled, leaning back in her chair. "Of course. What's going on?" "We've been hearing some pushback from a group of parents who feel like their children aren't being challenged enough under the new system," he explained. "They think the focus on emotional well-being is overshadowing academic rigor, and I'd like to set up a meeting to address their concerns. I think your voice could really help ease the tension." Mia listened carefully, her mind already racing with ways to approach the situation. "I understand their concerns," she said. "It's important that we strike a balance between creating a nurturing environment and maintaining high academic standards. I'd be happy to meet with them and help facilitate the conversation." Principal Blake sounded relieved. "Thank you, Mia. I'll set up the meeting for next week." As she hung up the phone, Mia felt a familiar sense of purpose. The work was never finished. There would always be new challenges, new perspectives to consider, and new bridges to build. But she had learned that real progress wasn't about winning every argument. It was about listening, finding common ground, and staying committed to the goal of creating a school where every child could thrive. The following week, Mia walked into the school's auditorium, where a group of parents had gathered for the meeting. Some looked worried, others frustrated, and Mia could sense the tension in the room. She had prepared for this, knowing that addressing their concerns would require both compassion and clarity. Principal Blake began the meeting with a brief introduction, outlining the successes of the new policies, but also acknowledging the concerns that had been raised. Then he turned the floor over to Mia. "Good evening, everyone," Mia began, smiling warmly at the crowd. "I know many of you have concerns about the changes we've made, and I'm here to listen to those concerns. I understand that some of you feel like we focus too much on discipline reform and not enough on academics. I want to assure you that we hear you, and we want to work together to make sure our school provides both a supportive environment and a rigorous education." A man in the front row raised his hand. "I've got nothing against treating kids with respect," he said, "but it feels like the new system is more about making them feel good than preparing them for the real world. My daughter used to come home with challenging assignments, but now it seems like the teachers are just trying to keep everyone happy." Mia nodded, understanding the frustration behind his words. "I appreciate you bringing that up," she said. "It's important to find a balance between emotional well-being and academic challenge. Our goal with the new system isn't to lower expectations, but to make sure students feel safe and supported while they're being challenged. A child who feels valued and respected is more likely to engage with difficult material because they believe they can succeed." Another parent spoke up. "But what about kids who don't face these challenges at home? My son has always done well in school, and I don't want him to fall behind because the focus has shifted away from academics." Mia took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. "That's a valid concern," she said. "No child should feel like they're not being pushed to reach their full potential. But what we're trying to do is create a foundation of emotional safety for all students. When children feel emotionally secure, they are more willing to take risks in their learning. It's not about lowering the bar, it's about making sure every child has the support they need to rise to meet it." The room was quiet for a moment as the parents considered her words. "I hear what you're saying," the first man said finally. "But how do we know the new system will work in the long run?" Mia smiled. "That's a great question. The truth is, we're still in the early stages of this process. It's going to take time to see the full impact. But what we've already seen is that discipline issues are down, and students are more engaged. We're working with teachers to ensure that academic rigor remains a priority. And we're always open to feedback from parents like you to help us find the right balance." By the end of the meeting, the tension had eased, and many of the parents who had come in, frustrated, left with a better understanding of the new system. Mia knew they wouldn't win everyone over right away, but the conversation had been a step forward. And that in itself was progress. As the school year continued, Mia began working more closely with teachers to ensure that the new policies were being implemented in ways that benefited both students and staff. She knew that teachers often felt overwhelmed by the demands of their job, and she wanted to make sure they felt supported in this new approach. One day, Mia sat down with Miss Carter, Alex's new teacher, who had become a strong advocate for restorative practices. They had grown close over the past year, often collaborating on ways to improve the classroom environment. "I think the biggest challenge," Miss Carter said, "is making sure the kids still understand that there are consequences for their actions. It's easy for some people to assume that because we're focusing on empathy, we're not holding students accountable. But I've seen how powerful it can be when a child understands why their behavior was wrong and is given the chance to make it right." Mia nodded. "Exactly. It's not about letting kids off the hook, it's about teaching them responsibility in a way that doesn't shame or break their spirit." Miss Carter smiled. "I think we're on the right path. And having parents like you involved makes all the difference." Mia felt a warmth spread through her. The partnership between parents and teachers had grown stronger, and she was proud to be part of that. They were all learning together, finding new ways to support their students and each other. As the school year drew to a close, Mia was once again invited to speak at the district-wide education conference. This time, however, she wasn't nervous. She had seen firsthand how the changes they had fought for were making a difference not just at Alex's school, but across the district. When Mia took the stage, she spoke with confidence and passion, sharing the story of how parents, teachers, and administrators had come together to create a better system for their children. She emphasized the importance of empathy, collaboration, and community in creating lasting change. "We've learned that discipline doesn't have to mean punishment," Mia said, her voice steady. "It can mean guidance, support, and teaching. Our children don't need to be broken down to be built up. They need to know that they are valued, that they are capable, and that they have the support of their families and teachers to succeed." The applause that followed was loud and long, and as Mia stepped off the stage, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative. She had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in the fight for a better education system. And as she looked out at the faces in the audience, parents, teachers, and administrators all working together for the same goal, Mia knew that the future was bright, not just for Alex, but for every child who deserved to be seen, heard, and supported. Mia sat at her desk, typing out an email to the parents who had attended the community meeting the week before. Since that discussion, there had been a noticeable shift in the way both supporters and critics approached the new policies. The tone was less adversarial, more open, and Mia had seen firsthand how bridging the gap between differing opinions could bring about real change. It hadn't been easy, and she knew the work was far from over, but the small victories made the effort worthwhile. Her inbox was filled with messages from parents across the district, asking for advice on how to address similar issues at their schools. Some expressed concerns about discipline, while others wanted to create more inclusive environments. Mia responded to each one, offering guidance where she could, and connecting people to resources and support groups when needed. As she finished up the last email, Mia leaned back in her chair and sighed. She had come so far from the days of feeling powerless now. She was seen as a resource, someone others turned to for leadership and advocacy. The journey had changed her in ways she never imagined. Just as she was about to close her laptop, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Miss Carter, Alex's teacher. "Can you come to the school tomorrow? We're planning something special, and we'd love for you to be part of it." Mia smiled, her curiosity piqued. "Of course, what's the big surprise?" Miss Carter's response was coy. "You'll see. Just be here around 1 p. Mem." The next day, Mia arrived at the school at the requested time, her heart fluttering with anticipation. As she walked through the halls, she couldn't help but notice the subtle but meaningful changes that had taken place since the overhaul of the disciplinary system. There was a lighter, more positive energy in the air. Children greeted each other warmly, teachers engaged with their students more openly, and there was a sense of community that had been missing before. Miss Carter met Mia at the entrance to the auditorium, a wide smile on her face. "Thanks for coming," she said, leading Mia inside. "The students have been working on something special for the end of the year, and we wanted you to be here to see it." Mia's curiosity grew as she stepped into the room. The auditorium was filled with students and teachers, all buzzing with excitement. At the front of the room was a large banner that read, "Celebrating Kindness and Growth, a Year of Learning Together." Mia's breath caught in her throat as she realized what this was. The students were celebrating not just their academic achievements, but the changes that had taken place within the school changes that Mia had fought so hard for. Miss Carter guided her to a seat in the front row, then took the stage to address the audience. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice filled with enthusiasm. "Today, we're here to celebrate all of the wonderful progress we've made this year, not just in our learning, but in how we treat each other. We've been working hard to create a school environment where kindness, respect, and understanding are at the heart of everything we do." The students cheered, and Mia felt a surge of pride. This was what it was all about, creating a space where children felt safe and valued, where they could learn and grow without fear. "As you all know," Miss Carter continued, "we've made some big changes this year in how we approach discipline and how we work together as a school community. And none of this would have been possible without the incredible dedication of someone who helped lead the charge for these changes. So today, we want to recognize Mrs. Mia Carter for her hard work, her bravery, and her commitment to making our school a better place for everyone." The room erupted in applause, and Mia felt her cheeks flush with surprise and emotion. She hadn't expected this. Miss Carter waved her up to the stage, and though Mia was overwhelmed, she made her way forward, her heart pounding. As she reached the stage, Miss Carter handed her the microphone. "Would you like to say a few words?" she asked, smiling warmly. Mia took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces, children, teachers, parents, all of them part of the journey they had been on together. "Wow," Mia began, her voice shaky but full of gratitude. "I don't even know what to say. I never expected this, but thank you. This year has been one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life. I didn't set out to change the world. I just wanted to make sure my son and all of your children had the chance to learn in a place where they felt safe and respected." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But what I've learned is that change doesn't happen because of one person. It happens when a community comes together, when people care enough to speak up and stand up for what's right. And that's what we've done here. We've built something incredible, and I'm so proud of all of you students, teachers, and parents for the role you've played in making this school a place where everyone belongs." The audience applauded again, and Mia felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. "We still have work to do," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "There will always be challenges, but we've proven that when we work together, we can overcome anything. Thank you, from the bottom of my heart, for believing in this mission. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to be part of something so special." As she stepped down from the stage, Mia was greeted by hugs and handshakes, teachers and students alike. Alex ran up to her, his face beaming with pride. "You were awesome, Mama," he said, wrapping his arms around her waist. Mia laughed, hugging him tightly. "Thanks, baby. But today's about you and your friends. I'm just happy to be here with you." The celebration at Alex's school was just the beginning. In the months that followed, word of the changes that had taken place began to spread beyond the district. Other schools across the state began reaching out to Mia and the Parent Coalition, asking for advice on how to implement similar reforms in their own communities. Mia found herself busier than ever, traveling to other districts to meet with school boards, speaking at conferences, and helping to draft policy recommendations. It was exhausting work, but every time she saw the positive impact on students, children who were once struggling now thriving in supportive environments, she knew it was worth it. One day, after a particularly long day of meetings, Mia received a call from the state's Department of Education. They had heard about the work she was doing and wanted to invite her to join a task force focused on improving disciplinary practices across all public schools in the state. "We believe your experience and insight would be invaluable as we work to create a system that supports both academic achievement and emotional well-being," the representative said. Mia was stunned. The idea of influencing change on a statewide level was both exciting and daunting, but she knew this was the next step in the journey she had started. It was a chance to make an even bigger impact, to ensure that children everywhere had access to the kind of education they deserved. "I'd be honored," Mia said, her heart pounding with anticipation. "Thank you for the opportunity." As Mia continued her work, she often thought back to where it had all begun with Alex, and with her decision to stand up for him when no one else would. She had never expected that moment to lead her here, to a place where she was helping to shape policies that would affect thousands of children across the state. But now that she was here, she knew there was no turning back. The road ahead was still full of challenges, but Mia had learned that with perseverance, collaboration, and a commitment to doing what was right, even the biggest obstacles could be overcome. One evening, as Mia and Alex sat together on the porch, watching the sun set over their quiet neighborhood, Alex turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his face. "Mama, do you think things will always be this good at school?" Mia smiled, pulling him close. "I think we've made a lot of progress, baby. But we still have to keep working hard to make sure it stays this way. Change isn't something that happens once, it's something we have to keep fighting for." Alex nodded, his eyes serious. "I want to help." Mia's heart swelled with pride. "You already are, Alex, just by being the amazing kid you are." As the stars began to dot the sky, Mia knew that their journey was far from over. But for the first time in a long time, she felt at peace, knowing that they had made a difference, and that they would continue to do so, one step at a time. Be part of this ongoing journey. Hit that subscribe button and join a community that believes in the power of education, empathy, and standing up for what's right. Together, we can continue pushing for a brighter future, one where every child feels valued and supported. But this time, he would do it on his terms, without the constant demands of his old job weighing him down. A few months into his retirement, Ryan was approached by a local university to teach a course on ethical leadership and policing reform. The idea intrigued him. He had spent years putting these principles into practice, but now he had the opportunity to pass that knowledge on to the next generation of leaders. The thought of stepping into a classroom full of eager students, young people, who would one day be responsible for shaping the future of law enforcement, gave Ryan a renewed sense of purpose. He accepted the offer and began preparing for the course. On his first day at the university, Ryan felt a twinge of nervousness as he walked into the lecture hall. The students sat quietly, some of them looking excited, others curious, all waiting for the former police chief who had gained national recognition for his reforms. "Good afternoon," Ryan began, standing at the front of the class. "My name is Ryan Carter, and I'm here to talk to you about the future of policing." He paused, scanning the room before continuing. "But before we talk about the future, we need to understand the past, the mistakes, the challenges, and the moments when we didn't get it right. Because if we don't learn from those moments, we'll be doomed to repeat them." The room was silent as Ryan spoke, but he could feel the students' attention. Their interest piqued. Over the course of the semester, Ryan shared not just the victories he'd had in his career, but the hard lessons he had learned along the way. He emphasized the importance of empathy, listening, and above all, the responsibility that comes with the badge. Teaching gave Ryan a new outlet for his energy and passion. It wasn't the adrenaline-filled, high-stakes work of policing, but it was just as important. These students were the future, and he was determined to equip them with the tools they needed to lead with integrity. While Ryan was settling into his new role as an educator, Jordan Thompson's star continued to rise. His work on the national level had gained him a reputation as one of the most respected voices in the fight for justice reform. Jordan had helped pass landmark legislation that put ethical limits on the use of surveillance technology, created national standards for police accountability, and expanded community-led safety programs across the country. One afternoon, Jordan called Ryan from his office in Washington, D.C., and with some unexpected news. "Ryan, guess what?" Jordan said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "They want me to run for office." Ryan chuckled. "Who's they? And what office are we talking about here?" Jordan laughed. "A group of people who've been following my work think I should run for Congress. They want me to take this fight from the courtroom to the Capitol." Ryan wasn't entirely surprised. Jordan had always been a fighter, and he had the kind of charisma and conviction that made him a natural leader. "I can't say I didn't see this coming. Are you thinking about it?" "I am," Jordan admitted. "It's a huge responsibility, but I've been thinking about how much more we could accomplish with the right people in power. If I can push for change at the highest level, why not go for it?" Ryan nodded, though Jordan couldn't see it. "You've always said we need people inside the system to change it from within. This might be your chance to do just that." "I've been thinking the same thing," Jordan replied. "It's a big step, but I think it's the right one." As they talked, Ryan felt a deep sense of pride for his friend. Jordan had spent his life fighting for justice, and now he was on the verge of taking that fight to the national stage. The following year, Jordan launched his campaign for Congress. With his years of legal experience and his proven track record in reform, he quickly gained support from a wide range of voters. His platform focused on criminal justice reform, civil rights, and economic equality issues that had been central to his work for decades. Ryan, though retired, was actively involved in the campaign, offering advice and helping Jordan connect with key community leaders. He traveled with Jordan to campaign events, standing by his side as they continued to push for the changes they had always believed in. On the night of the election, Ryan sat in the campaign's headquarters, surrounded by Jordan's team, watching the results roll in. The energy in the room was electric, but Ryan remained calm, reflecting on everything they had accomplished together. When the final votes were tallied, it was official: Jordan had won the election. The room erupted into cheers, and Jordan was immediately swarmed by supporters and media. But as soon as he had a moment, Jordan made his way through the crowd to Ryan. "We did it, man," Jordan said, grinning from ear to ear. Ryan smiled, shaking his friend's hand before pulling him into a hug. "You did it! I'm proud of you." Jordan nodded, his expression turning serious for a moment. "None of this would have happened without you, Ryan. We've been in this together from the start." As the celebration continued, Ryan couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning of something even bigger. Jordan's election to Congress meant that the work they had started years ago, the fight for justice, fairness, and accountability, was now being carried forward on a national level. And while Ryan was stepping back, he knew that the movement would continue to grow, led by people like Jordan, who were ready to take the next steps. As Ryan watched Jordan deliver his victory speech later that night, he felt a sense of closure and fulfillment. The work they had done together had made a lasting impact, not just in their city, but across the country. They had faced countless obstacles, but through it all, they had never given up. Ryan's life was quieter now, but it was filled with meaning. His time teaching at the university continued to bring him joy, and the students he mentored were already starting to make waves in the fields of law enforcement, social justice, and community activism. His influence would live on through them, and through the work Jordan was doing on a national scale. In the end, Ryan realized that the fight for justice never truly ended. It was passed down from one generation to the next, evolving with each new challenge. But he took comfort in knowing that the work would continue long after he was gone. And as he looked toward the future, Ryan Carter was filled with hope that the lessons they had learned, the battles they had fought, and the progress they had made would lead to a world that was fairer, more just, and filled with opportunity for all. As the story draws to a close, we want to thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of justice, friendship, and change. If you enjoyed this story and want more thought-provoking content like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us continue sharing stories that inspire, challenge, and make a difference. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear where you're watching from and what impact this story had on you. Subscribe now for more impactful stories and content that makes you think. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.